What if everything we thought we knew about ancient civilizations is wrong? For centuries, we've labeled them primitive, superstitious, or technologically simple. But what if that's a profound misunderstanding? What if, instead of stumbling blindly through the natural world, they were keen observers, masterful experimenters, and sophisticated stewards of plant intelligence? This is the story of a forgotten science. Not one of steel or steam, but of roots, vines, fungi, and flowers. A science not written in equations, but passed down through ritual, song, and sacred ceremony. Across continents and millennia, diverse cultures didn't just encounter mind-altering plants. They studied them. They refined them. They wove them into the very fabric of their societies as tools for healing, prophecy, and connection with something greater than themselves. We're not talking about recreational use. This was something far more intentional. These were not parties or escapes. They were carefully guided journeys into the depths of consciousness, often led by trained specialists, shamans, priests, healers, who understood dosage, timing, and context with astonishing precision. To understand this properly, we need a few key terms. The word drug carries too much modern baggage. Instead, scholars often use the term entheogen from the Greek, meaning generating the divine within. Entheogens were not taken to get high, but to encounter the sacred. The active ingredients in these plants are often alkaloids, complex nitrogen-containing compounds like psilocybin in magic mushrooms, mescaline in cacti, or DMT in jungle vines. These molecules can temporarily rewire perception, dissolve the sense of self, and open doors to visions, insights, or profound emotional release. Even more astonishing is the concept of synergy. Some ancient cultures discovered that combining certain plants unlocked effects neither could produce alone. The most famous example is Ayahuasca, a brew from the Amazon that pairs a DMT-containing leaf with a vine rich in MAO-inhibiting compounds. Without that second ingredient, the DMT would be broken down in the stomach and rendered inactive.
This isn't accidental. It's empirical chemistry, refined over generations through observation and practice.
In this journey, we'll visit the misty highlands of Peru, where stone temples hummed with ritual sound and cactus visions. We'll walk through the green Sahara of 7,000 years ago, where rock art hints at mushroom-guided ceremonies. We'll stand in the shadow of Maya pyramids, where priests consumed flesh of the gods to speak with ancestors. We'll trace the steam of Scythian cannabis baths across the Eurasian steppe and ponder the lost elixir of Soma praised in India's oldest hymns. But this is more than a catalog of ancient trips. It's a re-evaluation of human intelligence. These societies developed deep ecological literacy. They knew which plants grew where, how to prepare them safely, when to use them, and how to integrate the experiences afterward. Their knowledge was holistic, blending botany, psychology, architecture, and cosmology into a unified system of understanding. Much of this wisdom was nearly erased. Colonizers burned libraries, missionaries outlawed rituals, oral traditions were severed by violence and displacement. Yet fragments remain in pottery shards, in cave paintings, in the resilient practices of indigenous communities who never stopped honoring these plants. Today, as modern science rediscovers the therapeutic potential of psychedelics, we find ourselves circling back to insights these ancient cultures never forgot. Depression, trauma, addiction conditions that plague our modern world were addressed not just with plants, but with context, community, and ceremony. So, as we explore these forgotten chapters, let's do so with humility, not as tourists of the exotic, but as students of a lost science. One that reminds us that consciousness itself is a landscape worth exploring, and that some of humanity's deepest wisdom may have bloomed not in laboratories, but in forests, deserts, and sacred groves. This is not a story of superstition. It is a story of mastery. And it begins long before history books ever started writing. Deep in the rainforests of southern Mexico and Guatemala, archaeologists have uncovered a curious collection of stone artifacts that puzzled scholars for over a century. Carved from volcanic rock, These small sculptures depict human or animal figures seated in ritual poses, their hands resting on what appear to be oversized mushroom caps. Dated as far back as 1000 BCE, they belong to the Olmec civilization, often called the mother culture of Mesoamerica, and later appear among the Maya. For decades, Western academics dismissed these objects as mere phallic symbols or abstract art. But in the 1950 seconds, a groundbreaking shift occurred. Ethnomycologist R. Gordon Wasson, working alongside indigenous Mazatec healers in Oaxaca, began to connect the dots. He realized these were not random shapes. They were precise representations of psychoactive mushrooms used in sacred ceremonies for thousands of years. The Maya had a name for them, Teonanacatl. It means flesh of the gods. This was no casual nickname. It reflected a profound spiritual belief that by consuming these mushrooms, one could commune directly with deities, ancestors, and cosmic forces. Evidence of this practice appears not only in stone but in painted codices and ceramic vessels. One Maya vase shows a figure vomiting a common part of the ceremonial process as a mushroom sprouts from his head, symbolizing the birth of vision. Another depicts a ruler receiving a mushroom from a priest during a solstice ceremony, suggesting its use in matters of state, prophecy, and royal legitimacy. What's remarkable is not just that they use these fungi, but how they use them. Long before modern psychology coined terms like set and setting, the Maya understood that the experience depended on context. Rituals were held at night, often in secluded caves or temple courtyards. Participants fasted beforehand. Chants, drumming, and incense shaped the atmosphere. The dose was carefully measured too little, and the vision would not come too much, and the journey could become overwhelming. This was not experimentation in the chaotic sense. It was disciplined, intentional, and embedded in a cosmology that saw consciousness as fluid and interconnected with the natural world. The mushroom was a teacher, a messenger, a bridge. And yet, this knowledge nearly vanished. When Spanish conquistadors arrived in the 16th century, they saw these rituals as diabolical. Friar Diego de Landa, infamous for burning Maya codices, wrote with horror about the devil's mushroom that led people into hallucinations and lies. He ordered the destruction of sacred texts, banned ceremonies, and punished practitioners. For centuries, the use of Teonanacatl went underground, preserved only in remote indigenous communities. It wasn't until the 20th century that the world relearned what the Olmecs and Maya had known for millennia. In 1955, Wasson participated in a velada, a healing ceremony led by the Mazatec curandera, Maria Sabina. His account in Life magazine shocked the Western world and ignited global interest in psilocybin. But let's be clear, this was not a discovery, it was a rediscovery. The knowledge never disappeared. It simply waited, quietly, in the hands of those who never stopped honoring the flesh of the gods. Today, science confirms what these ancient cultures intuited. Psilocybin can reduce anxiety, dissolve rigid thought patterns, and foster deep emotional insight. Yet the Maya would likely say the true power wasn't in the molecule alone, but in the sacred container that held it. The mushroom stones stand as silent witnesses to a sophisticated spiritual science, one that saw the mind not as a machine to be fixed, but as a garden to be tended with reverence, ritual, and the quiet wisdom of the forest. While mushrooms captured the imagination of Mesoamerican priests, they were far from the only mind-altering plants in the ancient pharmacopoeia. In the same sacred gardens and forest clearings, another quiet but powerful ally grew on twisting vines, the morning glory. To the Aztecs, it was known as Ololuqui, meaning round things. Its small brown seeds contain LSA, or lysergic acid amide, a compound chemically related to LSD. Unlike the vivid, colorful visions of psilocybin, Ololuqui tends to produce a more introspective, dreamlike state, deeply emotional, sometimes somatic, and often focused on inner healing rather than cosmic spectacle. Priestesses and healers would grind the seeds into a paste or steep them in water, then consume the brew during nighttime rituals. The experience was used for divination, diagnosing illness, or seeking guidance from spirit forces. Ethnographic records from the colonial era describe women entering trances, speaking in altered voices, and revealing hidden truths about crops, relationships, or community conflicts. But the botanical mastery of Mesoamerican cultures didn't stop at seeds and fungi. They also crafted complex fermented beverages like balché, made from the bark of the Lonchocarpus tree, honey, and water. While balché itself was mildly psychoactive, historical accounts suggest it was sometimes infused with other visionary plants, creating layered ceremonial drinks tailored to specific purposes. This reveals a deeper truth. These societies weren't just users of psychoactive plants. They were cultivators, botanists, and ritual chemists. They knew which plants grew best in which soils, how to store seeds without losing potency, and how to combine ingredients to modulate effects. Their knowledge was practical, precise, and passed down through generations with care. And yet, this entire system of sacred plant wisdom came under brutal assault. When Spanish colonizers arrived, they saw not science or spirituality, but heresy. Catholic doctrine demanded a single path to the divine through Christ, not through vines or mushrooms. Indigenous rituals were outlawed. Sacred groves were cut down. Codices that detailed plant uses were burned in public pyres. One of the most devastating losses was the destruction of the Maya and Aztec libraries. Thousands of bark paper books, filled with astronomical charts, medical recipes, and entheogenic protocols, turned to ash under the orders of missionaries like Diego de Landa. What survived did so by chance or secrecy, hidden in caves, memorized in song, or practiced in remote villages far from colonial reach. Even the name Ololiuqui nearly vanished. Today, we know about it largely because of the Florentine Codex, a 16th century manuscript compiled by the Franciscan friar Bernardino de Sahagún. Ironically, it was his attempt to document indigenous idolatry that preserved crucial details about plant use, healing practices, and cosmology. Modern science has since confirmed LSA's psychoactive properties, though it remains far less studied than psilocybin or mescaline. Yet for the ancient peoples of Mesoamerica, Ololiuqui was never just a chemical. It was a voice of the earth, a tool for clarity, and a thread connecting the human soul to the unseen web of life. In contrast to the ecstatic flight of the mushroom, the morning glory offered a quieter descent, a journey inward, into the roots of the self. Together, these plants formed a spectrum of sacred experience, each honored for its unique gift. Their legacy reminds us that botanical knowledge is more than identification. It is relationship. It is respect. And in a world racing towards synthetic solutions, the morning glory whispers an ancient truth. Sometimes, the most profound medicine grows quietly on a vine, waiting for those who know how to listen. High in the Peruvian Andes, nestled between snow-capped peaks and roaring rivers, lies a stone labyrinth older than Rome. This is Chavín de Huántar, a ceremonial center built over 3,000 years ago by the Chavín culture, one of the earliest complex societies in the Americas. From the outside, it appears as a cluster of weathered plazas and terraces. But step inside, and you enter a different world, one designed not just for worship, but for transformation. Archaeologists have long debated the purpose of Chavín's intricate underground galleries, narrow air shafts, and carved stone corridors. But in recent decades, a compelling theory has emerged. This temple was engineered to amplify altered states of consciousness. And at the heart of that experience was a sacred cactus known as San Pedro. San Pedro, or Echinopsis pachanoi, contains mescaline, a powerful psychedelic alkaloid. Its use in the Andes stretches back millennia, and at Chavín, the evidence is carved in stone. The most famous artifact is the Raimondi Stela, a towering slab depicting the staff god, a supernatural being with fang teeth, serpent hair, and, most tellingly, San Pedro cacti sprouting from its limbs like divine branches. Other carvings show jaguars, eagles, and shamans holding the cactus with unmistakable reverence. Even more telling are the snuff trays and ceramic vessels found on site. Chemical analysis has revealed traces of mescaline, confirming that San Pedro was not just symbolic, it was consumed. Likely prepared as a bitter tea, it would have induced vivid visions, emotional release, and a profound sense of unity with the cosmos. But here's where the Chavín people reveal their true genius. They didn't rely on the plant alone. They designed the entire temple to intensify the experience. The underground galleries feature precisely angled ventilation shafts that carry the sound of rushing water from nearby canals, creating a constant echoing roar like the voice of the earth itself. In flickering torchlight, the carved walls seem to move, their eyes and mouths shifting with the shadows. Acoustic studies have shown that a single conch shell trumpet, blown in the right chamber, can produce standing sound waves that vibrate through the stone floor felt in the bones as much as heard by the ears. Imagine participants, having just drunk San Pedro, moving through this sensory maze, water roaring, stone humming, walls breathing. The boundary between inner vision and outer reality would blur completely. Why go to such lengths? Scholars believe these rituals served a vital social function. Around 900 BCE, the Andes faced climate instability, resource competition, and population shifts. The Chavín cult may have used these immersive ceremonies to unify diverse groups under a shared spiritual experience, creating cohesion through awe, not coercion. This wasn't just religion. It was neuroarchitecture, a fusion of botany, acoustics, hydrology, and psychology, all orchestrated to guide the human mind toward revelation. And unlike later empires that centralized power through force, the Chavín influence spread peacefully through pilgrimage, trade, and the sheer magnetism of their rituals. People came from hundreds of miles away, experienced the temple's mysteries, and carried its symbols back to their own communities. Today, San Pedro ceremonies continue in the Andes, led by curanderos who trace their lineage back through centuries of unbroken practice. They call the cactus Huachuma and say it teaches humility, clarity, and connection to Pachamama, the Earth Mother. Chavín de Huántar stands as a monument not to conquest, but to consciousness. A reminder that some of humanity's most advanced technologies were never made of metal or wire, but of stone, water, sound, and the quiet wisdom of a green, spiny cactus that opens the doors of perception. In the dense, humming rainforests of the Amazon, a dark, bitter brew has guided spiritual journeys for centuries. Known today as ayahuasca, it is often described as a modern phenomenon, popularized by retreat centers and celebrity seekers. But its roots run far deeper into a pre-Columbian past where indigenous peoples had already mastered one of the most sophisticated plant synergies ever discovered. At first glance, the recipe seems simple. Two plants boiled together for hours. One is the vine Banisteriopsis caapi, known as ayahuasca itself. The other is usually the leaf of Psychotria viridis, called chacruna. But the chemistry behind this pairing is nothing short of brilliant. Chacruna contains DMT, a potent psychedelic compound that, when smoked, produces an intense, short-lived vision. Yet, when swallowed alone, DMT is broken down by enzymes in the gut and has no effect. The vine, however, contains beta-carboline alkaloids' natural MAO inhibitors. These compounds temporarily disable the enzymes that would destroy DMT, allowing it to pass into the bloodstream and reach the brain. The result is a prolonged, immersive journey that can last 4 to 6 hours, often accompanied by deep emotional purging, ancestral visions, and profound insights. This is not a lucky accident. Ethnobotanists agree that discovering this combination required generations of careful observation, trial, and cultural refinement. There are tens of thousands of plant species in the Amazon. The odds of randomly boiling these two together and recognizing their unique synergy are vanishingly small. Yet over 30 distinct indigenous groups across the basin use nearly identical preparations, suggesting this knowledge is ancient and widely shared. Archaeological evidence supports this. In 2019, researchers analyzed a 1,000-year-old ceremonial pouch from Bolivia. Inside, they found traces of not only DMT and harmine and MAO inhibitor from the ayahuasca vine, but also bufotenine and other psychoactive compounds. This proves that complex entheogenic mixtures were being prepared and used long before European contact.
For indigenous communities, ayahuasca was never just a vision-inducing drink. It was a diagnostic tool. A healer might use it to locate the spiritual root of an illness, to communicate with plant spirits for guidance, or to restore balance within a community. The experience was always embedded in ritual, guided by songs called icaros, preceded by dietary restrictions, and followed by integration through storytelling and reflection. Today, as clinical trials explore ayahuasca's potential for treating depression, PTSD, and addiction, we are rediscovering what these cultures never forgot, that healing is not just chemical, but contextual. The molecule opens the door, but the ceremony walks you through it. Yet this resurgence brings ethical challenges. The global demand for ayahuasca has led to commercialization, cultural appropriation, and sometimes dangerous practices by untrained facilitators. True respect means recognizing that this knowledge belongs to living traditions not as a commodity, but as a sacred inheritance. Many indigenous elders warn that the vine is not a toy. It is a teacher, demanding humility, intention, and responsibility. Those who approach it with arrogance often face difficult lessons. So while science now validates ayahuasca's neuropharmacology, its deepest wisdom remains unchanged. It teaches that consciousness is malleable, that suffering can be transformed, and that we are never separate from the web of life. Long before laboratories existed, the shamans of the Amazon understood that the most powerful medicine grows not in a pill, but in a vine, and that true healing begins when we listen to what the plants have to say. In the highlands of ancient India, over 3,500 years ago, priests gathered at dawn to prepare a mysterious liquid they called Soma. They pressed it from a plant, filtered it through wool, and offered it to the gods with hymns of praise. Those who drank it felt invigorated, fearless, and radiant, so connected to the divine that they believed they touched immortality itself. The Rigveda, one of humanity's oldest religious texts, dedicates more than 120 hymns to Soma. It is called the king of plants, the lord of speech, the friend of Indra. It grants strength to warriors, wisdom to seers, and ecstasy to poets. Yet by around 500 BCE, Soma vanished from ritual practice. The plant was forgotten, the recipe disappeared, and for over 2 millennia scholars have asked, what was Soma? Many theories have emerged. One of the most famous suggests Soma was the fly agaric mushroom, Amanita muscaria, with its bright red cap and white speckles. This mushroom grows in mountainous regions of Central Asia and contains psychoactive compounds that can induce altered states. Proponents point to descriptions in the Rigveda of Soma growing without roots and being reddish and milky traits that loosely match the mushroom. But there are problems. Amanita muscaria is not native to the Indian subcontinent. Its effects, delirium, nausea, twitching, are rarely described as blissful or enlightening in the hymns. And crucially, the Rigveda says Soma was pressed to yield a golden liquid, while mushrooms do not produce juice when squeezed. Another compelling theory proposes that Soma was not a single plant, but a combination. Some researchers suggest Syrian rue, a plant rich in harmaline, an MAO inhibitor, was mixed with psilocybin-containing mushrooms or another DMT source. This would create a brew similar in chemistry to ayahuasca, producing vivid, lucid visions. The golden color could come from added turmeric or honey. Yet others argue for a more mundane candidate, ephedra, a stimulant shrub still used in traditional medicine. Ephedra contains ephedrine, which increases heart rate, alertness, and energy, matching descriptions of Soma giving warriors courage before battle. In fact, Zoroastrian rituals in ancient Persia used a plant called hauma, likely ephedra, in a strikingly similar way. But ephedra lacks the mystical, visionary qualities so vividly described in the Rigveda. The text speaks of Soma revealing the path of the sun, allowing the drinker to see the light within and fly through the heavens. That sounds less like caffeine and more like a true entheogen. Perhaps the truth is that Soma was a now extinct plant, lost to climate change or overharvesting. Or maybe its identity was deliberately concealed, reserved for initiates in a secret oral tradition. Whatever it was, its disappearance marked a turning point. As Vedic religion evolved into classical Hinduism, the emphasis shifted from direct visionary experience to philosophical inquiry, temple worship, and textual study. The living encounter with the divine gave way to doctrine. The mystery of Soma endures not just as a botanical puzzle, but as a symbol of a lost way of knowing. It reminds us that some truths are not written in books, but tasted, felt, and seen in the shimmering space between earth and sky. And though the original plant may be gone, the longing it inspired remains a human desire to touch the sacred, not through belief alone, but through direct, transformative experience. Today, the Tassili Nadjer Plateau in southeastern Algeria is a sea of sun-baked stone and endless sand. But 7,000 years ago, it was a lush savanna watered by monsoon rains, dotted with lakes, and teeming with giraffes, elephants, and human communities. It was here, during what scientists call the Green Sahara period, that some of the world's most enigmatic rock art was created. Carved and painted on canyon walls, these ancient images depict human figures with strange, rounded heads that taper to a point uncannily resembling mushrooms. Some figures appear to be dancing, arms outstretched, eyes wide open. Others hold what look like gourds or staffs, while flowing lines suggest movement, energy, or even trance. One famous panel, known as the Great Gods, shows towering beings with mushroom-shaped heads surrounded by smaller humans in postures of reverence. For decades, archaeologists interpreted these as abstract symbols or stylized masks. But in the 1,990 seconds, Italian ethnobotanist Giorgio Samarini proposed a radical idea. These were not masks at all. They were literal representations of psychoactive mushrooms, and the scenes depicted sacred rituals led by shamanic figures. He pointed to the consistency of the imagery across dozens of sites, the postures of ecstasy, and the absence of any known headgear in the region that matches the shape. He also noted that a species of psilocybin mushroom, Psilocybe meyeri, still grows in North Africa today, often in grassy, humid zones like those that once covered the Sahara. Could it be that these early pastoralists used visionary fungi to navigate a changing world? As the climate shifted and the rains began to fail, communities faced drought, migration, and social upheaval. In such times, shamans often serve as guides, not just spiritual, but ecological, interpreting omens, mediating conflict, and helping people adapt. A mushroom-induced vision might reveal the location of hidden water, the cause of illness, or the will of ancestral spirits. Of course, not all scholars agree. Critics argue that without chemical residue or direct ethnographic links, the mushroom interpretation remains speculative. They suggest the shapes could represent ceremonial headdresses, animal horns, or purely symbolic forms. But consider this. Across vastly different cultures from Mesoamerica to Siberia, mushrooms have repeatedly appeared in sacred art at the exact moment they were used ritually. Is it so unlikely that Saharan peoples did the same? What makes this theory compelling is not just the images, but the context. These paintings were not casual doodles. They were made in remote, acoustically resonant caves, places that feel otherworldly even today. Many are aligned with solstices, suggesting astronomical knowledge. The effort required to climb these cliffs and create such detailed art implies deep significance. If Samarini is right, then the Sahara once hosted one of the earliest known entheogenic traditions on Earth, predating the mushroom stones of Mesoamerica by thousands of years. And though the rain stopped and the desert advanced, the memory of those ceremonies may have traveled. Some researchers even suggest echoes of this Saharan shamanism influenced early Nile Valley spirituality or migrated north into Mediterranean mystery cults. Whether or not the figures truly depict mushrooms, they speak to a universal human impulse, to seek meaning beyond the ordinary, to dissolve the self in the presence of the sacred, and to find guidance in the quiet voice of the natural world. In the silence of the desert, these painted ghosts still whisper a question. What did they see when the world turned green and the veil between realms grew thin? Not all sacred plants offer gentle visions or luminous insights. Some demand courage, some test the limits of body and mind. And few are as formidable as Datura, a plant with trumpet-shaped white flowers, spiny seed pods, and a chemistry so potent it can blur the line between healing and harm. In the arid canyons of the American Southwest, the ancestral Puebloans, builders of the great cliff dwellings at Mesa Verde and Chaco Canyon, knew this plant well. They called it by names now lost to time, but its presence lingers in the archaeological record. Residue from Datura seeds has been found in ceremonial vessels, buried deep within kivas, the circular underground chambers used for ritual and community gatherings. Datura contains powerful alkaloids, scopolamine and atropine, that induce a state known as delirium. Unlike the clarity of psilocybin or the introspection of morning glories, Datura's effects are chaotic. Users may experience vivid hallucinations that feel utterly real, complete disorientation, memory loss, and a terrifying sense of detachment from the body. In high doses, it can cause seizures, coma, or even death. So why would anyone use it? Because in the right context, under strict guidance, Datura was not a drug of escape but a tool of initiation. Ethnographic records from descendant Pueblo communities suggest it was used in rites of passage, particularly for adolescents entering adulthood. The ordeal was not meant to be pleasant. It was meant to be transformative. Imagine a young person, fasting for days, then given a carefully measured dose under the watch of elders. The experience might last for hours, even days. In that altered state, they might confront fears, receive visions of their life path, or encounter spirit beings who tested their worthiness. Surviving the journey proved resilience. Integrating it marked maturity. This was not recreation. It was ritualized risk, a controlled confrontation with the unknown. The plant was respected, even feared. Elders knew which parts to use, when to harvest, and how to prepare it safely. Knowledge was guarded, not shared lightly. Modern science confirms Datura's danger. It is unpredictable. 2 seeds from the same pod can have wildly different potency. Yet this very unpredictability may have been part of its spiritual power. It reminded users that the sacred is not always safe. That wisdom often comes through trial. Importantly, we must avoid romanticizing this practice. There is no evidence of casual or frequent use. And oral histories from Pueblo elders today often speak of Datura with caution, emphasizing that its time has passed or that its use is strictly limited to specific ceremonial roles. What this reveals is the full spectrum of entheogenic practice in the ancient world. Not every mind-altering plant was about bliss or beauty. Some were about ordeal. Some were about surrender. Some were about staring into the abyss and returning with a new name. In a modern age that often seeks only comfort and control, the story of Datura offers a sobering counterpoint. It reminds us that transformation is not always gentle, that some doors open only when we are willing to lose ourselves, and that true mastery of plant chemistry includes knowing not just how to unlock a vision, but how to hold space for the terror that sometimes comes with it. The ancestral Puebloans did not fear the darkness. They walked into it with eyes wide open, hearts prepared, and roots deep in the red earth of their home. On the vast grasslands stretching from the Black Sea to the Altai Mountains, a nomadic people once roamed with horses, bows, and a deep reverence for the dead. They were the Scythians' fierce warriors, skilled traders, and, as it turns out, early connoisseurs of cannabis. Our main source for their customs comes from the Greek historian Herodotus, who wrote in the 5th century BCE. He described a funeral ritual that stunned his contemporaries. After burying their dead, the Scythians would build a small enclosed tent. Inside, they placed hot stones, then threw the seeds of a plant onto the glowing rocks. Thick vapor would rise, and the mourners would crawl inside, inhaling deeply. Herodotus wrote that they howled in delight from the fumes, and that this practice left them purified and clean. For centuries, scholars dismissed this account as exaggeration or myth. But in the 1940 seconds, archaeologists unearthed a series of frozen tombs in the Pazyryk Valley of Siberia, burial sites of high-status Scythian nobles, preserved in permafrost for over 2,500 years. Inside one kurgan, or burial mound, they found a small wooden bowl containing charred cannabis seeds. Nearby, a copper cauldron held residue consistent with burned plant material. Even more telling, a leather pouch held nearly 2 pounds of well-preserved cannabis clearly cultivated, not wild-gathered. Chemical analysis later confirmed high levels of THC, the psychoactive compound in cannabis. This wasn't just hemp for rope or fiber. This was potent, intentionally grown cannabis likely selected over generations for its mind-altering effects. The Scythians weren't just using it casually, they integrated it into sacred rites. The steam bath served as both purification and communion, a way to honor the dead, cleanse the living, and perhaps even receive messages from the spirit world. Inhaling vapor was a clever method. It avoids the harshness of smoke, delivers cannabinoids efficiently, and creates a shared, immersive experience within the enclosed space. What's remarkable is how widespread this knowledge was. Scythian trade routes stretched from Persia to China, and cannabis use appears in cultures across this corridor. Yet the Scythians stand out for the ritual precision they brought to it. They didn't just consume, they consecrated. Even their clothing reflected this connection. Some burial textiles were embroidered with cannabis leaf motifs. Horses were buried with cannabis in their stomachs, perhaps to accompany them into the afterlife. This wasn't recreational intoxication. It was ceremonial technology, a way to alter consciousness for spiritual and social purposes. In a culture without temples or written scripture, the vapor tent became a mobile sanctuary, carried across the steppe with every migration. Today, as cannabis gains legal and medical acceptance around the world, we often frame it as a modern discovery. But the Scythians remind us that humans have been cultivating and revering this plant for millennia, not just for its fiber or food, but for its power to shift perception, ease grief, and bind communities in shared ritual. Their legacy endures not in stone monuments, but in the quiet hiss of vapor on hot stone, in the scent of resin on the wind, and in the enduring human desire to find meaning even in the breath of a plant. The Scythians may be gone, but their steam still rises, carrying with it a truth as old as the steppe itself. Sometimes, to honor the dead, we must first awaken the living. High on the slopes of Mount Parnassus in ancient Greece, nestled in a cleft of sacred rock, stood the temple of Apollo at Delphi. For over 1,000 years, pilgrims from across the Mediterranean journeyed here to consult the most famous prophetess of the ancient world, the Pythia. Seated on a tripod above a deep chasm, she would enter a trance, speak in riddles, and deliver prophecies that shaped wars, founded cities, and guided kings. But how did she do it? The Greeks believed Apollo himself possessed her. Modern scholars, however, have long suspected a more earthly explanation. Something in the air, the water, or perhaps even the bread. For decades, the leading scientific theory pointed to geology. In the 1,990 seconds, researchers discovered that Delphi sits at the intersection of 2 fault lines. As tectonic plates shifted, they released gases from deep within the earth, particularly ethylene, a sweet-smelling hydrocarbon known to induce trance states, euphoria, and out-of-body experiences. Ancient texts even describe a sweet scent rising from the oracle's chamber, matching ethylene's odor. This theory gained strong support. Ethylene was used as an anesthetic in the early 20th century, and at low doses, it can produce dissociative states without full unconsciousness. Exactly the kind of altered awareness described in historical accounts of the Pythia. But another, more controversial idea has lingered in the shadows. Some researchers, including scholar Carl Ruck, have proposed that the Pythia's visions may have been aided not by gas, but by grain. Specifically, by ergot, a fungus that infects rye and barley, producing alkaloids chemically similar to LSD. Ergot thrives in damp, cool conditions, and ancient Greece grew plenty of barley, which was used to make the sacred meal offered to the oracle before her sessions. If that barley was contaminated, even mildly, it could have delivered a low dose of psychoactive compounds enough to heighten suggestibility, spark visions, or deepen trance. Supporters point to descriptions of the Pythia trembling, sweating, and speaking in a changed voice, symptoms consistent with mild ergotism. They also note that priestesses were chosen from local peasant women, likely familiar with grain storage and seasonal fungal risks. Yet this theory faces serious challenges. Ergot poisoning at higher doses causes convulsions, gangrene, and death hardly compatible with the Pythia's regular, controlled performances. And unlike at Chavín or in the Amazon, there is no direct archaeological evidence of intentional entheogen use at Delphi. So which is it? Fumes or fungus? Perhaps the truth is more nuanced. It may not have been one or the other, but a combination of factors: geological gases, fasting, rhythmic chanting, the power of suggestion, and possibly even subtle plant influences that together created the perfect conditions for altered states. What matters most is this: the Greeks understood that prophecy required more than intellect. It required a shift in consciousness, and whether through earth or grain, they created a sacred technology to access it. The Oracle of Delphi reminds us that even in the cradle of Western reason, there was room for mystery, that logic and vision are not opposites, but partners, and that sometimes the clearest answers come not from the mind alone, but from the breath of the earth, the whisper of the grain, and the quiet surrender to something beyond ourselves. In the shadowed forests and stone cottages of medieval Europe, a strange legend took root. Women, often healers, midwives, or widows, were accused of smearing a mysterious ointment on their skin, then leaping onto broomsticks and flying through the night to attend secret gatherings known as sabbats. Church inquisitors called them witches. But what if their flights were not fantasy, but pharmacology? Historical records from witch trials describe these ointments in chilling detail. Made from plants like belladonna, henbane, mandrake, and datura, they were mixed with animal fat or lard and applied to the skin, often under the arms or on pulse points. These plants all contain powerful tropane alkaloids, including scopolamine and atropine, which can induce vivid hallucinations, sensations of flying or floating, time distortion, and out-of-body experiences. Crucially, when absorbed through the skin, these compounds bypass the digestive system, reducing nausea and allowing the psychoactive effects to dominate. The broomstick? Likely not a vehicle, but a tool for application, a way to spread the ointment without using hands. This wasn't random folklore. These plants had been used for centuries in folk medicine for pain relief, sleep, and childbirth. Many witches were simply village healers who inherited botanical knowledge from pre-Christian times, when goddess worship, plant spirits, and shamanic trance were part of rural spirituality. But with the rise of the church, such practices were recast as devil worship. The flying ointment became proof of a pact with Satan. Women who once served their communities were now hunted, tortured, and burned. Yet fragments of this knowledge survived in grimoires, in herbal manuscripts, and in whispered family recipes. The 16th century physician Andres Laguna even tested a confiscated ointment on a woman condemned as a witch. He reported that after applying it, she fell into a deep sleep, laughing and talking to herself, and upon waking, claimed she had flown over mountains and danced with spirits. Modern science confirms his observations. Tropane alkaloids disrupt the brain's acetylcholine system, leading to dreamlike states where the boundary between self and world dissolves. The sensation of flight is a well-documented effect. So were these women deluded? Or were they practitioners of a suppressed entheogenic tradition, one that used plants not for evil, but for healing, divination, and communion with the unseen? It's important not to romanticize. Many accused witches likely never used such ointments. The trials were often fueled by misogyny, land disputes, or mass hysteria. But the consistency of the ointment descriptions across regions from Germany to Italy suggests a real, shared botanical practice beneath the myth. This medieval echo reveals a painful truth. When sacred plant knowledge is stripped of its ritual context and labeled heresy, it becomes dangerous not because of the plants, but because of the fear they provoke in those who do not understand them. Today, these same plants are studied in labs for their effects on memory and consciousness. But in the hands of medieval healers, they were part of a living tradition, one that saw the mind as a landscape to be navigated, not controlled. The witches did not fly on brooms. They flew on molecules. And though their voices were silenced by fire and fear, their legacy lingers in every garden where belladonna blooms, and in every mind that dares to question where the boundary between magic and medicine truly lies. Imagine a library holding thousands of books, each one a lifetime of knowledge about plants, healing, stars, and the human soul. Now imagine watching it burn. This is not metaphor. It happened again and again across the ancient world. When empires expanded, when new faiths rose to power, when colonizers arrived with crosses and cannons, they often brought fire not just for conquest, but for erasure. In 1562, in the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico, the Spanish friar Diego de Landa stood before a pyre of Maya codices. He watched as centuries of astronomical charts, medical texts, and sacred rituals turned to ash. He later wrote that he burned them all, which I regret, yet he believed he was saving souls from the devil. In that single act, an entire pharmacopoeia of entheogenic wisdom, how to prepare mushrooms, how to dose morning glories, how to interpret visions, was nearly lost forever. Similar scenes unfolded across continents. In India, oral lineages guarding the secret of Soma faded as Vedic rituals gave way to temple worship. In the Andes, Spanish priests smashed San Pedro carvings and banned cactus ceremonies. In Europe, the Inquisition silenced the last echoes of pagan plant knowledge by branding its keepers as witches. This was not accidental loss, it was systematic. Sacred plant use was labeled idolatry, heresy, or madness, not because it was ineffective, but because it offered a direct path to the divine that bypassed priests, popes, and political control. If anyone could speak to the gods through a vine or a mushroom, what need was there for intermediaries? For centuries, scholars assumed this knowledge was gone, but it was not destroyed. It went underground. In the Amazon, shamans continued brewing ayahuasca in hidden clearings, passing songs and recipes from elder to apprentice. In Oaxaca, Mazatec curanderas like Maria Sabina preserved the mushroom rites in remote mountain villages. Among Pueblo communities, elders quietly maintained the protocols for Datura, sharing them only with those ready to bear the responsibility. Even in the burned fragments, clues remained. The few surviving Maya codices, the stone carvings at Chavín, the chemical traces in Scythian tombs. These were not just artifacts, they were lifelines. And oral traditions proved more resilient than fire. In indigenous cultures, knowledge is not stored in books, but in bodies, in chants, in gestures, in the rhythm of preparation. A grandmother teaching her granddaughter how to harvest San Pedro at dawn. A shaman humming an icaro to guide a vision. These acts are living libraries. Today, as archaeologists analyze residue in ancient pots, and ethnobotanists collaborate with elders, we are slowly reassembling what was nearly lost. But this is not about reclaiming secrets for science alone. It is about honoring the keepers who protected them through centuries of persecution. The tragedy is not just that knowledge was erased, it is that we forgot it ever existed. We assumed ancient peoples were primitive, when in truth, they were pharmacologists of the soul. Yet their wisdom endures not in grand monuments, but in quiet resilience. In every vine that still grows, in every song still sung, in every elder who says, "This is how we have always done it." Every song. The libraries may have burned, but the stories are still breathing. When we think of chemistry, we picture labs, beakers, and white coats. But long before modern science existed, ancient cultures were conducting their own form of chemistry, empirical, experiential, and deeply attuned to the natural world. They didn't have microscopes or molecular models, yet they mastered complex plant interactions through generations of careful observation, trial, and ritual refinement. Take the most famous example, ayahuasca. To create it, you must combine two specific plants. One contains DMT, a powerful psychedelic. The other contains compounds that prevent the body from breaking DMT down. Without that second ingredient, the brew does nothing. This synergy is not obvious. It requires understanding that some plants unlock the power of others, a principle modern pharmacology calls potentiation. This was not guesswork. It was systematic knowledge, passed down with precision. Indigenous brewers knew which vine to use, how long to boil it, when to add the leaves, and how the season affected potency. They treated the process like a sacred science, because it was. But their mastery went far beyond synergy. They understood extraction. The Maya pressed Soma-like substances through wool to filter impurities. The Scythians vaporized cannabis seeds to release active compounds without combustion. The Vedic priests described Soma as golden, suggesting they refined it into a purified liquid, perhaps through repeated straining or fermentation. They also grasped dosage with remarkable nuance. Too little, and the vision would not come. Too much, and the journey could become dangerous. Among the ancestral Puebloans, elders measured Datura seeds by hand, knowing that even one extra could mean the difference between revelation and ruin. In Mesoamerica, mushroom ceremonies began with small doses, increasing only as the participants' readiness became clear. Perhaps most profoundly, they mastered set and setting, a term modern therapists now use, but which ancient cultures lived by instinctively. They knew that consciousness is shaped by context. A vision in a chaotic space is different from one in a quiet cave. A journey without preparation is different from one preceded by fasting, prayer, or song. That's why they built temples like Chavín to Huántar, with acoustics, light, and water designed to guide the mind. That's why the Oracle of Delphi fasted and chanted before inhaling fumes. That's why Ayahuasca ceremonies begin with days of dietary restriction and end with hours of integration. This was not superstition. It was applied cognitive science, wrapped in ritual. They recognized that the mind is not a machine, but an ecosystem responsive to sound, scent, intention, and community. And they understood something modern medicine is only now rediscovering, that healing is not just about the molecule, but the meaning. A plant may open the door, but it is the ceremony that walks you through it. So let us stop calling them primitive. Let us stop assuming that without test tubes, there can be no knowledge. These cultures developed a science of consciousness, one that blended botany, psychology, architecture, and ethics into a unified practice. Their laboratories were forests. Their instruments were songs. Their data was gathered not in graphs, but in lives transformed. And their legacy reminds us that true wisdom lies not in dominating nature, but in listening to it patiently, humbly, and with awe. For much of the 20th century, mind-altering plants were buried under layers of fear, prohibition, and moral panic. Psychedelics became symbols of rebellion, not healing. Research was shut down. Ancient traditions were dismissed as primitive or dangerous. But in recent decades, something remarkable has happened. Science has begun to circle back, retracing steps first taken thousands of years ago by shamans, priests, and healers. The turning point came in the 1950 seconds, when ethnomycologist R. Gordon Wasson participated in a sacred mushroom ceremony with Maria Sabina in Oaxaca. His article in Life magazine introduced psilocybin to the Western world, sparking both fascination and alarm. Around the same time, Swiss chemist Albert Hofmann, who first synthesized LSD, began advocating for its therapeutic potential. But by the 1970 seconds, the war on drugs had slammed the door shut. Psychedelics were classified as having no medical value, a claim we now know was more political than scientific. Yet underground, the work never stopped. Indigenous communities continued their ceremonies. A few brave researchers kept publishing, and quietly, a new generation began asking, what if we got it wrong? Today, that question is being answered in labs and clinics around the world. At Johns Hopkins University, psilocybin has shown astonishing results in treating depression, anxiety, and addiction, especially in patients who had exhausted all other options. At Imperial College London, brain imaging reveals how psychedelics temporarily dissolve the ego's rigid boundaries, allowing new neural connections to form. Organizations like MAPS are pioneering MDMA-assisted therapy for PTSD, with success rates that outperform conventional treatments. But here's the irony. Modern science is using fMRI scanners, double-blind trials, and peer-reviewed journals to confirm what ancient cultures knew through direct experience, that these substances, when used with care, can heal the deepest wounds of the human psyche. Yet, this rediscovery brings a critical responsibility. Too often, Western science extracts knowledge without honoring its source. Ayahuasca retreats are marketed as luxury experiences, sacred plants are patented, indigenous voices are sidelined. True progress means collaboration, not appropriation. It means recognizing that the Mazatec, the Shipibo, the Quechua, and countless other cultures are not relics of the past, but living stewards of wisdom. Their protocols, diet, intention, song, community are not optional extras. They are essential to safety and meaning. Some researchers now work directly with indigenous elders, ensuring that studies respect cultural context and benefit the communities involved. Others advocate for legal frameworks that protect ceremonial use, not just clinical access. This is not about replacing tradition with technology. It is about weaving them together, honoring the empirical insights of the ancients, while applying modern rigor to expand access and understanding. The path forward is delicate. We must avoid both blind romanticism and sterile reductionism. These plants are neither magic cures nor dangerous drugs. They are powerful tools, ones that demand humility, preparation, and respect. As we stand at the edge of a new era in mental health, let us remember, we are not discovering something new, we are remembering something ancient, and this time, let us do it with gratitude, not greed. With partnership, not plunder. Because the greatest breakthrough may not be in the molecule itself, but in our willingness to listen to science, to tradition, and to the quiet voice of healing that has been speaking all along. We began this journey with a simple question. What if the so-called primitive peoples of the past were not primitive at all? What if, instead, they possessed a kind of knowledge we have only begun to reclaim? Across deserts, jungles, mountains, and steppes, forgotten civilizations did more than survive. They explored, they experimented. They listened to plants, to stars, to the quiet movements of their own minds. They understood that consciousness is not fixed, but fluid, that healing is not just physical, but spiritual, and that some of the deepest truths cannot be read in books, but must be lived, felt, and seen. Today, we live in a world of unprecedented connection, yet profound disconnection. Anxiety, loneliness, and ecological grief shape our age. We chase distraction, yet hunger for meaning. In this moment, the legacy of these ancient cultures offers not a blueprint, but a compass. They teach us that mind-altering plants are not escapes from reality, but invitations to see it more clearly. That a mushroom, a vine, or a cactus can be a mirror revealing our wounds, our patterns, and our capacity for change, but only if we approach them with reverence, not recklessness. They remind us that context is everything. A molecule alone is not enough. It is the fasting, the song, the community, the intention that transforms chemistry into healing. Modern science is now proving this, but the ancients never needed proof. They knew it in their bones. And perhaps most urgently, they show us that humans and nature are not separate. The plants they honored were not resources to be exploited, but teachers to be respected. Their rituals were acts of reciprocity, taking only what was needed, giving thanks, and living in balance. In an era of climate crisis, this wisdom is not quaint. It is essential. Of course, we cannot and should not replicate the past. We live in a different world, with different challenges and ethics, but we can learn from their humility, from their patience, from their deep attention to the web of life. As Maria Sabina, the Mazatec curandera, once said, "I am a little woman, but I contain the universe." In those words lies the heart of this entire story. that the vastness of the cosmos is not out there alone but within us, waiting to be awakened with care.
So where do we go from here?
Not backward, but forward, with memory. Not to appropriate, but to honor. Not to consume, but to connect. Let us protect the forests where ayahuasca grows. Let us support indigenous rights to practice their ceremonies freely. Let us fund ethical research that bridges science and tradition. And let us never forget that the search for meaning is one of the oldest human impulses and one of the most sacred. The civilizations we've explored may be gone, but their voices echo in stone, in song, in the quiet rustle of leaves. They whisper a truth as old as time, that to heal the world, we must first remember how to listen to each other, to the earth, and to the still, small voice within. And in that listening, we may yet find the wisdom we need to build a future worthy of their legacy.